everyone, my name is Maddie, welcome back to my channel and welcome to this video where I'm going to be attempting to answer the question, do I even like fantasy anymore? Okay, so slightly overdramatic introduction, but had to be done. Basically, I am in a genre slump, and I have mentioned this in live streams over the last couple of months. Like, this has definitely been ongoing for a little while now. But it's so bad. It's so bad. I can't say I'm in an overall reading slump. I'm still reading, maybe not as much, but that's due to how much time I have, but I'm still reading. I'm not reading fantasy at all. I don't want to. I don't want to go anywhere near it at the moment, and it's so strange to me. So this is just going to be probably pretty short, though it's me, and we all know I can talk until the cows come home. But probably a pretty short video just kind of discussing where I'm at with what I'm reading at the moment. Is fantasy still my favourite genre? And even more so, is it even something I want to be reading anymore? Let's find out. So, what has my reading been like recently? As you will have seen if you've seen some of my vlogs or TBR games or wrap-ups or anything, my reading has been up and down like no tomorrow over the last few months. My job is very, very intense. Very quickly, for anyone who's interested, because I've seen a lot of people asking, I work in consulting, and so basically go into businesses and help them run more efficiently and help save them money. But the nature of my job is it's very hands-on. A lot of consultancies are kind of a bit more remote. Ours is very hands-on, so I have to travel to wherever my client is working. Currently that is in the Lake District. So I have to be up in the Lake District Monday to Thursday, Monday to Friday every week. And so I have a long commute either way. And I have evenings out with my colleagues every evening when I'm up there, and I don't have access to a lot of things in my normal life when I'm up there because I can't take my whole life up with me every week. So all of that results in not a lot of reading happening. I work very long hours. We have a minimum 10-hour day. It's often longer than that. And as I said, there's socials every evening with colleagues. So I don't get a whole lot of free time. Then I only get to be home for 2 days a week. And so I have to do all the normal boring life stuff. I can't do it in an evening here and there. I have to do it all on the weekends, and that's laundry, cleaning, errands, literally everything, seeing friends, seeing family. So I don't have a whole lot of free time. This has resulted in me not having a whole lot of time to read, unsurprisingly. So I have been reading a little bit less. I have also massively changed what I do read. I think when I was first doing this job, the first few months, I actually somehow read a lot, but that's because we were in lockdown. When things reopened, I had no time. So even when when things first started reopening, I was very much like, there's no time, I just can't read. And I just practically read nothing for a while. I had weeks on end often where I wouldn't read at all. And it was really annoying, but that's just what the situation was. And then as I kind of got more used to it, I realized like I do have little bits of time here and there where I can read. But because I'm tired, because they're only really short amounts, the kind of thing I want to read is much easier, or at least easier to me, and that's YA books, it's speculative, maybe dystopian, it's romance. Those are the kind of things I feel like I have the mental space to read at the moment. Definitely not fantasy, and it took me so long to accept this. I kept starting fantasy books and putting them down. I kept having them all on my TBR and looking at them and just not wanting to touch them, not wanting to pick them up. Like, this just kept happening again and again, and I couldn't work out what was going on. I thought I was in an overall reading slump until I realised that when a romance book was put in front of me, I really wanted to read it and wanted to spend all my time reading. But if a fantasy was put in front of me, then I would choose to not read at all over reading that. And that is such a weird concept to me. I have always read a large variety of books. It's been a mixture of romance and contemporary and fantasy and dystopian, all of that. I've always read a big combination, but I've always loved fantasy. Yes, I tend to like the slightly lower fantasy, less epic, higher political stuff, slightly more magical, kind of fabulism, that vibe. But even still, I adore fantasy, and I always have adored fantasy worlds and fantasy characters. And so the concept of me not wanting to pick up fantasy books took me so long to come to terms with. But I think I do need to accept that at least for now, that's where I'm at. But that's very much why I'm referring to this as a genre slump, coined by Steph from Steph Loves, versus a slump, because I do want to read. I just don't want to read fantasy. And it's infuriating. I look at my shelves and there are so many anticipated books and series which I just know I would love. And I can't bear the thought of picking them up. And I am still finding I can reread fantasy. So for example, a couple months ago I read Strange the Dreamer and Muse of Nightmares again. because they're rereads and they're familiar worlds, and also to me, those feel like much lower fantasy than a lot. They feel very tangible. So they're really easy accessible. They were fine for me to read, but anything more than that, like, oh my god, the concept of a Brandon Sanderson book right now, nothing fills me with more dread. Truly, it doesn't. It's insanity, and I really wish I wasn't feeling like this, because I miss it. I do like fantasy, but also it's giving me kind of guilt-free space to read a lot of stuff, because I've realized really weirdly I have this almost strange hierarchy in my mind of like what's considered a like worthwhile read, and I don't know why. And if I watch other people reading, I couldn't care less. If they read like smut novellas forever, I'll be like, that is completely valid, like have fun. But for myself, I'm like really harsh. I'm like really harsh fantasy, like YA fantasy, YA like dark contemporary, and then like romance down here somewhere. And I don't know why I have this weird ranking, but it always feels like a cop-out when all I want to read is romance, and I'm like, oh, you just make proper. Romance is proper. It's a book. It's still a book. It doesn't matter. It's just as good as anything else, and I've kind of actually enjoyed being forced to read more contemporary and romance, because like I'm realizing how much I really love it, and I shouldn't be prioritizing fantasy solely for the reason of like fantasy being proper. If I just want to read a fantasy, then hell yeah, I'm going to prioritize it. But I feel like I have been for the last few years possibly prioritizing it for the wrong reasons, which is very interesting kind of self-reflection I've had. So yeah, definitely in a complete fantasy slump. Undecided whether it's still my favorite genre. I feel like I can still quite confidently say that kind of urban fantasy, slightly speculative vibe is probably still my favorite genre. Anything where it's a pretty standard setting that we know well with a few bits twisted, and it's why I like things like dystopian and things like some of TJ Klune's books. They feel that kind of tangible level of real with fantasy stuff going on as well. And I think that's always going to be my favorite kind of book, that slightly speculative, slightly fabulous, slightly magical vibe. So I think that's probably still my favorite genre, but my leaning towards huge fantasy worlds and huge fantasy casts, less and less so. Am I saying I'll never come back to it? No, of course I'm not. I am sure it swings and roundabouts, and someday I'll suddenly get bored of romance and want to switch straight back to fantasy. Like, I go through roughly 6-month cycles with this anyway, but I feel like my aversion to fantasy, especially much like more involved fantasy, has gone on a lot longer in this instance than normal, and I'm quite keen to get back to not being scared of fantasy books and not being so intimidated by them. But I also need to accept that this is my life now with this work, and I don't have a whole ton of free time to just like get into a book, and big fantasy worlds require that a little bit more. So maybe I won't read as much fantasy. Maybe that is just the reality of my job and my life, and that's not going to change anytime soon. It's an interesting thing I'm having in my job at the moment, and it's the mindset shift from uni and school to working, is I keep working like, oh, it's fine, just get through another few weeks and then we'll have a break. No, that's how holidays work at school and uni. That's not how work works. You just keep going every week. There's not a break. Yes, I'm currently on annual leave, and you do sometimes get a short break, but not in the same way. So that's been an interesting adjustment, and I think I'm doing that even more so with things like YouTube and reading, that I'm like, oh, it's fine, I'll get through this couple of weeks of work and then I'll get back to it. I don't magically have more time. That's not how it works. By the time I get to those 2 weeks, I will have 10 times more meetings in than I would have thought, and I'll be just as busy. So it's an interesting one. It's also why there's been less content. Hello. We've not done anything recently. But yeah, fantasy. I don't know what to do with it. I feel like the other thing which I need to mention in this is at the end of the year, you know, I plan to do my standard rewatch. My videos are like top 10 books I need to read and top series I want to read in 2021, all of those kind of videos, and react to them. I mean, I feel like I will always fail things like that. I'm rubbish at keeping my mind on something for a year. Like, I'll say I'm gonna do it and then I'll forget about it 2 minutes later and just my mind will wander off to something new and exciting. But more so than ever, I will have failed those. Like, I can't read fantasy, and I had 10 fantasy series I was meant to read this year. I don't think I've read a single, I think I've read one, and then like 1 or 2 books from a couple others. I'm not going to read all 10 of those series, not even remotely close. I'm not even going to attempt most of them, because there's no point me reading them when I'm not feeling up to it. Like, that's not gonna help anything, because I'll just end up not enjoying them or falling into a slump altogether because I'm not enjoying what I'm reading. So There's literally no point. So I'm gonna stick with fun books that I really want to be reading right now. So I will have failed those videos, and you know, I'll still watch them in the year and see how badly I did, but it's amazing how different my reading was, what was it, 7-8 months ago, to what it is now. I could not have envisaged being this far away from fantasy at this point in the year. It's been an interesting one, but I'll get back to it eventually. I think to kind of close out this video, which I'm realizing is like really short, but I feel like I've said my piece of like, I still love fantasy, it holds great memories, but also right now I cannot face it, is go and grab a couple of the like speculative, fun fantasy books that I've read either recently or I'm looking forward to reading, to kind of explain what I do still lean towards and what kind of things do feel approachable. Because I feel like I can make this whole video of like, I don't like fantasy anymore, and then in 10 minutes I'll read a book and somebody like, that's fantasy. There's some which still seem appealing. I don't understand what's going on up here, none of you have a chance, don't you worry. But I guess also this could serve as like, if you're someone who is intimidated by fantasy, these are a really good way of having something a bit fantastical in a story, but it's not scary intimidating. It's not Brandon Sanderson, basically. Okay, so one book I've read in the last couple of months, which I think fits this perfectly, is The Extraordinaries. I reread this and then read the sequel, Flashfire. This is the perfect level of like high school, fun, kind of YA contemporary vibes with superheroes and some like supernatural elements. That's spot on what I need right now. I do find if I read a lot of just contemporary romance back to back, I get a little bit burnt out of it quicker than I would fantasy. I mean, I always like having variety in my reading. I can't read any one genre back to back without getting bored of it. But I do feel like having that slight fantasy element just mixes it up for me, and I really enjoy that. So Extraordinaries is spot on. Other ones I've read before but I'm planning to reread are Silence of the Wild Belt. I've talked about this book literally a million times. This is a little novella and it's very much sci-fi fantasy, but that's not the focus. I think that's the thing I like, is when it's not the focus. So this is a weird setting, but the setting doesn't matter because it's introspection and characters and like almost philosophical analysis. And that's what I love about this book. So the setting, the fact that it's fantasy and robots and whatever, doesn't matter at all. And that's why I love it. Next are two books that I read a very long time ago, but I'm very much considering rereading, which are Lament by Maggie Stiefvater, which is, again, urban fantasy, just has some fae, but in like the real world, you know, our world. So again, that's slightly fantastical take. And Our Savage Song, or This Savage Song, sorry, by V.E. Schwab, which is like a future setting, but again, it's set in like a city that we would recognize with a few magical elements going on. That's the level of fantasy we're happy with right now. And then three other books I'm considering reading soon. Watch me read none of these anytime soon, you know what I'm like. A Beautifully Foolish Endeavour by Hank Green. This is a sci-fi dystopian book and it's a sequel to An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. And they're really good fun. Again, character focused, character driven, talks about other topics like fame and all sorts of things with like some fantasy twists going on. The level we're liking right now. I then do have two much more ouchy fantasy ones, which are Diary of Blood by S.T. Gibson, but this is a fantasy romance. So again, is the focus on the big fantasy world? Not really. It's much more on, you know, the characters and the romance. I would assume. I've not read it yet, but I'm very excited to. And I think this is the kind of thing I could deal with right now and would enjoy reading, but it gives me enough of the fantasy flavor that I need, because I do love it, without scaring me. And then one actual fantasy book, which actually would be a reread, I forgot I'd even read this, is 13.5 Lives of Captain Blue Bear. This is a chunky book. But I read this when I was really quite young, and it's just this weird, whimsical story. It's kind of mixed media. I'll try and show you. Like, it's got all, you can see like there's illustrations, there's all sorts happening in here. It's like a weird, whimsical story following this big blue bear and his 13.5 lives and all the things he gets up to. And so it's just really interesting. And again, that's the kind of thing, even though it's huge and should intimidate because it's 700 pages, that's the kind of thing I feel like I could just sit down and like dissolve into at the moment, versus something much more scary and intense, like adult high political fantasy, aka half the books I'm dying to read but just can't at the moment. So that is this video. This was as typically unstructured as any of my videos are, but I hope you enjoyed it. A little insight into where I'm at with my reading at the moment. Let me know if you've ever been through a genre slump. Did you get back out of it? Please give me hope that one day I'll actually be brave enough to read things like The Poppy War and Brandon Sanderson and Robin Hobb, because right now I'm definitely not. that is it for the video. So give it a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you'd like to see more content from me. There are links down below to all of my other social media if you want to connect in any other way. But that is it for this video, so bye, and I'll see you in the next one.